Hello again.
Here I am back. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we hear you well.
Great. So we are live.
Monika.
Hi, Monika. How are you?
I'm doing fine, thank you. How about you?
I'm doing okay considering everything that's going on.
Here I am back.
I think I have to close my YouTube and I'll
I
exit.
hope you can hear me.
We hear you well.
We are already live, I see.
Welcome to our live screen.
Great. So I'll just leave so that you guys can.
I'll also stop share. Great. Can you hear me still okay? Does the screen scan? Great, wonderful. All right, so I guess we'll just, are we ready to start? Are you ready?
Absolutely, anytime.
Wonderful. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our continued conversation on education and climate change. This is Heian Shin from the Center for Sustainable Development, where our education initiatives are hoping to build a shared roadmap for radical and transformative change through education and through the voices of leaders around the world on education for sustainable development, global citizenship education, gender equality, as well as human rights education. So thank you all for staying tuned and for joining this series. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing our honored guest, Monika Froehler. She is the Chief Executive Officer of Ban KiMoon Center for Global Citizens. She's a passionate change maker, advocate, founder, and speaker. She was actually entrusted to create the Ban KiMoon Center after working at the UN in Geneva, New York, Vienna, and the European Union, as well as the Austrian Foreign Ministry and field missions around the world. She is passionate about the implementation of the SDGs and the Paris Climate Agreement. Throughout her career, she has supported hundreds of women, young people, and communities all over the globe. And her work included working in Africa and Latin America to ban landmines, working to improve hospital care in rural Central Asia and Africa, assisting in eco-friendly city planning in Asia, as well as bettering the living conditions of women in the Middle East and West Africa as well. Monika, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much for this lovely introduction. Much appreciated.
So maybe we could start a little bit with your work with the center. Ban KiMoon Center for Global Citizen and its missions have supported leadership around the world and also built partnership, spread information on the SDGs, as well as advocating for the actual implementation of the work for marginalized groups, especially women and youth. So we wanted to start off by asking you, of these many efforts, which has facilitated, if you will, the fastest transformations or the intended outcomes than what you had expected?
Right. You summarized already quite well what the Ban KiMoon Center does, but I think for the benefit of the audience, as it's quite a new entity, let me go into it a bit. So the center is shaped very much by the legacy of the former Secretary General of the United Nations, Ban Ki-moon. We truly believe that he will be famous for two things. One of them will be the Sustainable Development Goals, and the other one, the Paris Climate Agreement. He found not only a good friend in Dr. Fischer, the former president of the Austrian Republic, already years ago, but both of them were unified in their sort of mantra for the next decades to come, to say that yes, the SDGs are important, and yes, the Paris Climate Agreement is important, but those that are tendentially still disadvantaged when it comes to the achievement, to the fulfillment of exactly those two big composites are women and youth. And women and youth need more of a voice in the process, more of an implementing ability, but also more of an education on it, because many are systemically disadvantaged. So this is sort of setting the mission of the Ban KiMoon Center, and we cluster our programs in 4 pillars. One of them is very much leadership, which means that we support the leadership of Ban Ki-moon, but we also support the leadership of Heinz Fischer and other board members that we have. But most importantly, we try to build leadership for future generations to take on the helm of SDG leadership and fulfilling them. We have 10 more years, and truly it will be for the leaders of tomorrow decisive to know about the global challenges. And Ban Ki-moon is very blunt on that one. He says that current leadership that we see around the globe, like in the United States or in other countries, don't necessarily have a global vision of what the community should tackle, but a very national one. And global citizenship is exactly the opposite. So educating for global citizenship means that you identify yourself first and foremost, not with your city, your tribe, your community, your immediate community, but that you see yourself as part of humankind and that you know about the challenges, but also about solutions. So leadership built up, basically. The second pillar after leadership for us is mediation, because what we see is that women and youth are not included in peacemaking, peacekeeping efforts, or even preventive efforts. So mediation for us is one term picked out, but in fact it's much broader. It's about the peace engagement of youth and women. Many times we see conflicts are actually battled out by terrorist fighters, by non-state actor groups, sometimes, of course, by armies, by states, by military. And many times the brunt of the challenges and of the havoc and the hardship are carried by women and youth in the society, often by civilians. The moment the hostilities cease, they are not included in the peace building, and yet they are included very much on the ground. But in the official sort of signing of peace agreements or even the negotiations of it, women or youth are hardly seen. We want to change this, and it's a tough one in the long run, because women in many regions of this world are not with equal rights and definitely don't have the same exposure or backing by the governments. So that's the mediation cluster, and a long way to go. When it comes to advocacy, that's our third pillar. So we have leadership, mediation, and advocacy. Advocacy means that we are campaigning with the help of our board members and many partners for the issues that we truly believe in, which are climate action and the Sustainable Development Goals. And that takes shape and form in many, many instances in different ways. Sometimes it's about formal education, sometimes it's informal education, sometimes it's activism, sometimes it's awareness raising, sometimes it's interviews, communication, like spreading it out, the information on the media, but also using platforms like, for example, the Scouts movement, Global Citizen, an amazing NGO that is helping young people to become activists. Sometimes it is working with UN Women on Orange the World, the campaign against violence against women. It takes many, many different programs to support that. And Ban Ki-moon carries many leadership roles, and Heinz Fischer does as well, that help us to get these platforms. And now the fourth pillar that we are tackling is education. And that's probably the most tangible when it comes to the programs and products, because we have issued online classes on sustainable development goals, on women's empowerment, on what global citizenship is all about. They are freely available, and anyone who is interested can check out www.bankimoncenter.org, and you will find these classes posted there. But apart from that, we have worked a lot with UNESCO on so-called GCED conferences. What does GCED stand for? I think this audience knows. It's the Global Citizenship Education target within the SDGs, and it's target 4.7. And we have done a lot with UNESCO in this regard already, focusing in our work, for example, last year, very much on how can you teach and learn transformative engagement? How can you teach and learn activism, if you wish? And we have seen youth activism has become more and more prominent and more important. Fridays for Future being a case in point, Me Too being another case in point. Black Lives Matter right now, case in point. We have so many, pride is also carried by lots of young people, not only from the LGBTQIA plus community, but also by many women who are up there, up front, and of course, members of the LGBTQIA community. So all of these movements present an incredible chance for education, but also challenges, because education has changed. It's not anymore the classical system of just face-to-face in a classroom, but education is changing also because of digitalization. Now, if you ask me in these 4 pillars, where are we most effective? It depends very much on which parameters you're applying. I would say leadership, our leadership engagements are most visible, because BKM, Ban Ki-moon, is traveling around the world. Lots of media attention is given to him. And also our fellows who we managed to educate to become future generation leaders, they are very visible in their own communities, in their own countries. We have fellowship cohorts of young women leaders who are trained in various fields and who are then sent back to their countries. We had a cohort from Asia and a cohort from the Middle East. We will soon have one from Latin America and another one from the Middle East, and are hoping for an African one if we find the right donors for it. And they are very visible to their own community and nation state. When it comes to, so that's most visible, I'd say. Advocacy is also very visible, and particularly, I'd say, a bonus point of our advocacy efforts is it reaches hundreds of people, if not thousands of people. So if you quantify success by the sheer number, then probably advocacy is our strongest bet. When it comes to mediation, our strength lies in our alliance with the UN system, because many of the peacemaking or even preventive efforts lie with international institutions or lie with governments. And so it's for us crucial to be interlocked with governments and UN agencies and other players who are formalistically in charge of these things, and even to deal with military every now and then. And so it is quite a high-level engagement that definitely is the long run sort of trajectory. When it comes to education, it is, when you measure it by success, it is the one where we have most products, where we as Ban KiMoon Center can really show we have contributed this portfolio of products. So it really very much depends on how you define success and how you see what you particularly target. Is it the quantity? Is it the target group? Is it the products? However you measure it, it depends.
Thank you so much for that full view of the work of the center, but also what the different arms are meant to do. I think that in itself is a really important point to communicate to the education community, in that it can't be just like a one. It is great to have focus and the intended outcome clear, but the road to getting there actually has to be manifold. You mentioned that all the different advocacy, as well as the leadership part, the visibility versus kind of more the work on the ground. I think all of those have to kind of work together for transformative change. So I think that is a kind of a key illustration of what also needs to happen as well. So thank you for that. Of the endeavors, have there been anyone that has been especially challenging to do? And I guess,
Absolutely. So if you imagine our overall endeavors as a SWOT analysis, maybe you know the principle in business where we have the strengths, the threats, the weaknesses, and the opportunities, basically the SWOT. If you're looking at the strengths of the system, as we are a small entity, I'd say that we are very flexible in reacting. For example, now the pandemic, for all of us, was the challenge of interruption of certain programs. We could easily switch to online and digital means. I have a very young team, very engaged female leaders in their own right, who really dedicated their time in lockdown then to transiting the various programs, fellowship programs, scholarship programs, mentorship programs, to the online space. But so a strength definitely was with the staff and with the flexibility and with the smallness of our entity, I would say. Also with the multi-dimensions of, we can connect as the institution that we are, academia, NGOs, governments and international organizations. We are maneuvering in exactly that kind of sphere and have partners, high-level partners in all of that, but also bottom-up partners, people that we are working with at grassroots level and that are reporting back what works, what doesn't work. So that too is an incredible strength because we hear the stories from the ground. We are on speed dial with those that actually are trying to implement and make a change, be it in SDG education, be it in climate action education, or be it in leadership build-up. A weakness definitely is, I would say, that we are dependent on voluntary funding as an institution, and that the field is so wide and so scattered. And if you're looking at it from the analysis of who needs what in these kind of times, I urge the listeners and everyone to imagine the pyramid of Maslow. Like Maslow created this pyramid of needs. And at the very bottom of this pyramid of needs, you have physiological needs like water, air, shelter, reproductive rights, etc. Only if that is fulfilled, you emerge to the next, you basically advance to the next strata, basically, which is the safety needs. So basic security, but also in COVID times, particularly health considerations, etc. The next strata then is love and belonging, and would be one that is absolutely crucial for also global citizenship education and for like friendships and being in a secure social environment and community. The next strata is esteem, which means something like that you have respect, that you have self-esteem, you enjoy some kind of recognition, you can play according to your strengths. And the tip of the Maslow pyramid is self-realization, self-actualization. And now, if you imagine it in education and in many other fields, if the basic needs are not met, we can't even talk about the tip of self-actualization, unfortunately. And in pandemic times, or even in times outside of the pandemic, if you have societies that don't manage to provide for the basic, you will have to focus, even in your educational efforts, on the very, very crude basics of the physiological needs, and then later on the safety needs. Only when you have those covered, you can talk about the rest. And hence, there is no one size fits all. If you have to say what's the particular threat to this overall system, it is very much the crumbling of the basis, and subsequently also the challenges that all of the other stratas have. So you need to contextualize. When you look at, for example, climate action education, if basic physical needs are not met, it will be very difficult to talk about recycling or to talk about the CO2 level in the atmosphere, because people will want clean water first and foremost to simply survive. If all of these desires are fulfilled, and we are talking, let's say, privileged societies like often happening in OECD countries, or let's say the G20 countries, we can talk about the other layers, and it needs to be tailor-made to exactly the need of the context, basically, of the geographical and societal and cultural context.
Yeah, thank you. I think in that you have hit both few different angles of it, one of them definitely being even climate change, which we will talk about a little bit further, but also having those basic needs met, I think is one of the biggest barriers and roadblocks that is faced by the education community right now, as we try to fill the basic needs, but also we need to push forward to the next agenda for sustainable development. So it has to happen simultaneously, which is very challenging. Yeah. On that note, I mean, you hit up on this already, but if you can delve a little bit deeper, then given that backdrop, what do you think might be the best kind of starting points then to accelerate efforts for climate change and some of the skills that are outlined in SDG 4.7, given that there are so many different angles and barriers that we need to tackle and move forward? What would be your ideas on what would be a good starting point for that?
There are multiple starting points, and it very much depends on the context that your school, your university, your country finds itself in. But what's definite is that we need top-down and bottom-up at the same time. What do I mean by that? Let me illustrate it. I have parents who turn to me and ask me, how can I educate my kids so that they will actually be better off than I am in the future, that they're equipped for the job market in the future, that they will find a niche somewhere where they can be economically independent enough. What can I do as a parent? And that's an overarching question across cultures, across societies. And many parents want their kids to be a bit better off. And I like to refer the people to the Sustainable Development Goals, because the SDGs, and all of our audience surely knows them, the SDGs literally are like a world governmental program. And many parents don't even know about them. Many kids don't know about them. Many students don't know about them. And yet they are the roadmap of where future jobs will develop necessarily, because these are the major challenges of our global community. So if students are asking me in my lectures, where can I find proper jobs? I tell them, finding means sometimes in this day and age that you need to create them. And you have best chance to create them by being aware of what goes on around you. And what goes on around you is very much well depicted by the SDGs. We have targets, we have indicators, we know where we lag behind. And I truly believe that the future of business and the future of our well-being as a planet lies with them. Now, that's from bottom up, but I want to give another example. For example, we in the Ban KiMoon Center have now collaborated with the Vienna Educational Council. Why do we do that? We wanted to make sure that SDGs and climate education is integrated into classes at primary, secondary, and tertiary level, all across at least our own vicinity, like ideally our city, but then also our country, etc. And we will learn a lot from seeing the lessons or the points of hindrance, the obstacles of what is happening here. And I'm sure that we can draw lessons for many others. I know other proponents are trying that as well in the grander scheme. And in this case, Bildungshub, like it's our educational council, has staged with us we called it a kickoff event last week. And we advertised it for, I think it was 3 hours that it was up on the internet. And the call was full. We could not accept any more teachers, headmasters, pedagogical staff, anyone to join, because we had reached the maximum capacity of that call, which illustrated to us that there is enormous desire and interest by the teaching community and by the education community to learn more how the SDGs and how climate education can be integrated. And what we learned from the call was often there is lack of information where to find the appropriate material, that there is lack of coordination within the schools, within the universities. The partners are not necessarily working with each other. There is lack of awareness and lack of being instructed how to teach it and how to include it in the existing syllabi, and lack of political support, because many teachers say, as long as it's not in the curriculum, how can we add on an additional layer? Here comes the top down, which means that there needs to be political regulation, and some countries have managed that exactly these subject matters are integrated into the curricula, because only then school systems can pick it up. And the top down in this day and age, again, has the particular challenge. It's not only enough to change curricula and syllabi in the content, but even in the method of how you teach. We have seen in the crisis that 2 sectors were particularly challenged. One sector was the health sector, and the other sector was the education sector. So SDG 3 and SDG 4, the one on quality health and the one on quality education, were challenged. Why? Because they were little flexible. There was little adaptability, little resilience built into the system. We have literally healed and taught people pretty much the same way over the past couple of decades, not to say century. And in the age of digitalization, that's just not the way forward anymore. In a recent talk that I had the pleasure to have with Irina Bokova, the former UNESCO Director General, and the former Minister of Education from Korea, we stipulated what it needs is high tech and high touch And what is meant by high touch is high connectivity, still interpersonal, still face-to-face, but also you need technology to support it, which makes up for a blended kind of education, which definitely in the future has the add-on challenge and yet opportunity to have education also in the digital space added with the interpersonal one that can't be underestimated, and that too needs to adapt to that. So top down, bottom up, many things simultaneously, but what is a given is education needs to reform to prepare the kids for the future that we want to see.
Wow, absolutely. And I think in these discussions, creativity is not always the word that emerges most frequently, but from what you were saying, it does require active engagement, not only just by engagement, but through creativity, using all the tools at hand, all the different stakeholders, educators, learners. What are creative ways to do it? I think it's also a key consideration.
And may I intersect here, because creativity, you're right, is a key. But if I try to put structure on how we as human beings in the technology boom that we will experience in the next couple of decades, how we will be able to make our stance. It is very much that we as human beings don't try to compete with machines. And my keywords here are artificial intelligence, automation, digitalization, and lots of processes that will lead to less employment in our thinking currently, so that we don't go as an antidote to machines, but that we learn to work with machines and exactly the human traits like innovation, creativity, team building, conflict management, caretaking, that these are emphasized in our education as well. And yes, of course, STEM will remain to be very, very important. And some call it STEAM now. So it's the science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics. But also the so-called GCED, this target 4.7, the global citizenship education, to have the wide perspective of what is needed. And I say this in the full conviction that if you'd ask me, what would you want children to know and to have like really absorbed once they exit school, and that's secondary, primary, secondary, and even tertiary, it's youngsters then, it would be knowledge about the Sustainable Development Goals, it would be global citizen values, and it would be 21st century skills. And for me, the 21st century skills entail creativity, conflict management, thinking outside of the box, innovation, checking what is fake news, what is right news, what is correct, what is incorrect, being able to work in multicultural environments, being digital savvy and equipped enough to do all of this. Values, global citizen values, are connected to identifying yourself not only in your own sphere, but having sort of the gaze beyond your own limitations and borders and cultural idiosyncrasies. And SDG knowledge is a given, because that portfolio will be the job market of the future and will be definitely the make or break for our planet in the future. And hence the importance can't be underlined enough. So it is these three components that need to be taught.
And do you think the three components need to exist both on the education system level in terms of transforming the education system, as well as individual acquisition? So you're saying it has to exist on both levels, the systemic level and for individual learning.
And the individual level. I absolutely agree. Both. And it is a simultaneous movement of bottom up and top down. And I have illustrated before that many of these activist movements where youngsters aged, I'd say 11 to 30, are eagerly going on the streets, protesting, demanding action. That this is showcasing how much exactly these components of SDG knowledge, global citizen values, so it goes beyond your immediate surroundings, and also 21st century skills come to play, and how they are utilized to change policy. And so therefore grassroots is needed, but also regulation is needed. And maybe just to give you two examples, there are two countries that managed so far to integrate climate education into their overall regulatory system, to their policy system. One of them is Italy, and the other one is Mexico. And right now, there are many countries that are looking at the sample of how did they do it? How could they change very swiftly to include an obligatory element of climate action and climate education into their syllabi and curricula throughout. And it stands to be tested how well it works over the years, but it's interesting samples that can be turned to for those that are interested.
And then building upon that a little bit, apart from existing efforts that are there and existing people, existing organizations working on these efforts for the SDGs and 4.7, because we do have quite a youth that is part of our network who are listening on this, what would be your advice then to those youth individuals who are kind of starting their journey in joining this movement? What would be your advice for them?
I think it's a Chinese proverb that says that every journey starts with the first step, and it is exactly that. What we do in our programs with our Global Citizen Fellows, our mentees, our Global Citizen Scholars, is that we try to instill thinking of what do you see as an immediate challenge around you in your everyday life. The bigger the challenge that you have observed, the bigger the opportunity is to do something against it. And that might be, as I said, climate action seems dauntingly big, but the moment you break it down to, we don't have recycle bins in the school, let's do something about that, it becomes far more tangible and even more, I'd say, people are more eager if they see the immediate change in their surrounding. My advice to anyone who feels that there is something going wrong in their current immediate surrounding would be, take that. Don't be bogged down by, I don't have budget. I don't have others who think the same way. I don't dare to stand up to speak out. Hopefully, we will have a generation that can get rid of all of these impediments and just tries. We as human beings are about trial and error. And even in my own doings, I'm sometimes reflecting, it's nice to have the words for the phenomenon. It's very nice. It's even nice if you can argue what the purpose of something is. It's good if you're passionate about it. But the actual crux of the matter, the actual decisive point is the deed, what you do about it. And it doesn't have to be flawless from the start. It can be an attempt. And I can tell you about beautiful samples. I have the privilege of working with the NGO Global Citizen. And what Global Citizen did, they started these guys, 4 guys, when they were 17 years old, all of them Australian. And they saw that their generation was impoverished in some parts of the world. And they said, that's so unjust. We in Australia have all of the like everything, all of the luxury that we can possibly think of. And just across the ocean in the Philippines, you don't have the same conditions. That's unfair. There are waste-picking people our age. So we want to eradicate poverty. Big call for 17-year-olds. And they said what's at our disposition is we host school concerts. And so they invited school bands and hosted school concerts. And initially were asking, I think, for ticket price, entry fees that they collected and donated. But eventually that wasn't good enough. And they were daring and called the management of Bono, U2, the star U2 Bono, and said, we know you're in Australia. We have this school concert to end poverty. And Bono was very, very excited about this and said, okay, I'm going to play pro bono for you at one of these concerts. And suddenly their movement became big. And I don't say that this is necessarily the journey of everyone, but they started as 17-year-olds seeing a challenge, seeing an unjust circumstance, trying to tackle it with their own means, schools concerts, and then amplified that by being lucky to get a big spokesperson as part of the engagement. What came from there was they founded an NGO. That NGO became bigger and bigger and bigger. In the meantime, they are raising millions of dollars for global citizen action around the globe, all in the sphere of the SDGs. And for example, maybe you have heard about the concerts in New York, there are concerts in Johannesburg, in Hamburg, all across the globe, where they are getting artists that voluntarily perform on stage for free, like Coldplay, Beyonce, Shakira, Trevor Noah, Naomi Campbell, Hugh Jackman, the biggies really are volunteering their time, and it's festivals that last for days, and the tickets for it you can't buy, but you have to do a global citizen action to get these tickets, and you have to promote it online. You have to do something for your community that is in line with the SDGs, and you will then be allotted a ticket to come to these festivals, seeing your artists who are also glowing for no poverty, no hunger, water and sanitation, gender rights, education, renewable energy. And you get inspired by the community that gathers at these events. And it's just one of the many examples. Not all of them have to be as big, but every journey starts with the first step. Try.
It's wonderful advice. Thank you for that. And I think we all know sometimes in our head that that is what is required, but it really takes reminders like this and a reminder of the example, concrete examples of what is possible by doing that and taking it one step at a time. So thank you for that.
And maybe I add to that one because I just was inspired. Sometimes the workshops that I'm holding, the same question comes up, but how can I start? And for those that want to have a very good read over a weekend, please check out Tina Seelig's book. It's called What I Wish I Knew When I Was 20. It's a book by the Stanford professor Tina Seelig. She has taught classes all across the globe, but particularly in Stanford, for young entrepreneurs. And what's interesting is she's giving lessons in this booklet of how you can, with an entrepreneurial mindset, and I'm talking at SDGs is social entrepreneurial mindset, how you can tackle these big challenges and still found a business that is profitable, working, without necessarily having to have the venture capitalist investing into the business. So if you want a good read, Tina Seelig, What I Wish I Knew When I Was 20, amazing read and quick one for a weekend, is very entertaining.
That's great. Thank you for the recommendation. We'll also make sure we include that in our program for youth as well. As you were speaking, I was also reminded of this particular group of women that you had mentioned at the beginning of the interview. As you mentioned, the injustices are faced by women can be severe, more severe, especially depending on the different where you are in the world. Yep. So this question is specifically on that, on the gender consideration. What do you see the role of women in achieving the SDGs, and more specifically on the SDG 4.7 that we are discussing?
The role of women is crucial. That's no secret. Half of the globe is female. 50% of humankind is female. And we as women do not enjoy the same rights and the same privileges still as men do. We are part, of course, of the Human Rights Declaration, and we all know that we should be equal before the law. We are not. And if you're following me, let's imagine the map of the world. And if you're following me around the world, what we see is still a major problem of child marriage in many parts of Asia, India, even sometimes in Africa. You have female genital mutilation practiced in many parts of the world, hampering the healthy development of women and definitely infringing their rights as human beings. You see that women for the same work do not earn the same salaries. You have unequal pay. Gender disparity is widening even in the OECD countries and in all parts of the world. For $1, tendentially, that a man earns worldwide, a woman gets 77 cents. And that's the average. So you can imagine that in countries where it's particularly bleak, what kind of difference in the earnings of a woman and a man really depicts. If it comes to financial education, property rights, women are disadvantaged. They don't even have the same access to school. So on a systemic level, access to education women are disadvantaged. On a systemic level, continuation of education in a pandemic, women are disadvantaged. Many of them don't have the means to connect to the internet, don't have devices that allow them to connect, don't have the technological skills to do so. So continuation of education when physical encounter, like face-to-face teaching doesn't happen anymore, gets even more cumbersome. We had 146 countries that were closing down schools during COVID-19, 146 countries. And you can imagine how many million of children were out of schooling for the reason of countries being in much stress about the pandemic and the health crisis. And so women and the digital divide and the unequal chances for the genders are detrimental. Interestingly enough, and for those of you who are keen supporters of not only the climate change idea and climate action, but also of women's rights, please check out an amazing inspirational lady. She's called Alana Murabit. She is the SDG ambassador and makes the argument that the one top solution against climate change these days is actually one that is not expected. If she asks that an audience, like the people come up with solar panels and energy efficiency and all sorts of renewable energy technology, most of the answers are technology driven. And or food waste, reduce food waste, of course, reduce CO2 emissions, traffic, industry, like these things come up. And yet, if you calculate it correctly and by parameters, the single most important effort that you can support against climate change is girls' education and reproductive rights. And that might sound bizarre, but it is the case because our population trajectory around the globe is one that will be exponential. And we are talking about up to 12 billion people in the year 2050. We're now at 7.6, some statistics say 7.8. So there will be a tremendous increase. Tremendous increase means more CO2 will be emitted. There will be more need for food, more need for industrial productivity, more need for products, more depletion of water, of biodiversity, of all sorts of things, more depletion of resources. And by educating girls and by giving them reproductive rights and knowledge about their own bodies and how it works, the more educated a society is, the fewer children per mother will be born. And it's not that I'm against life, it is just that I'm for conscious decisions of being able to raise the children and feed them and provide them with the basic Maslow's pyramid, with the basis of safety, security, and shelter, and of course, food, that we need to put more focus on, and this is the argument, girls' education and reproductive rights, even when we are talking about climate change.
That is absolutely eye-opening, and definitely SDG 5 on gender equality definitely asks for an SDG of its own. That topic alone really does require that focus and effort because it is so interconnected. I mean, talk about the SDGs being interconnected, right? Yeah. This is the prime example of
exactly.
that. Yeah. Speaking of the interconnectedness a little bit, how do you see the global citizenship education then intersecting with education for sustainable development? Is one achieving one dependent on the other? How do you see them being related?
For me, the debate whether ESD or GCED or what is more important, global citizenship education or education for the sustainable development goals or climate action, as you pointed out correctly, it is all interlinked. It's like asking a mother to decide which of her children she likes the most. It is impossible. And indeed, one needs to be connected to the other. What's crucial for all of them, and I have defined global citizenship education, at least in the understanding of the Ban KiMoon Center before. So we say, to repeat the components, it's knowledge about the SDGs, it's global citizen values, and it's the 21st century skills. And much of what is in the debate on ESD, GCED, is contained within these three components. How can these ingredients be put into practice? And I think if you imagine it again, I like to think in graphics. It helps me to order the confusion of the many ideas that are circulating. If you think as around a circle that says finance, another circle that says political will, and another circle that says partnership. In this intersection of these three circles, you find the actual action happening. So it's always finance, will, and partnership. And it's no matter if you look at it from the micro scale of a school. Let's pretend we are in a school, and let me beam you back to the Zoom call, to the kickoff event that we had just a week ago, where the teachers said, yeah, but I don't know, who can I turn to? Who are my counterparts? I don't know about the material, and I definitely don't have funds for doing anything extracurricular in my class. So on the micro level, it's exactly these ingredients that will be key to the implementation. But even on the macro level, let's go to the country level, to the policy level. We have finance, political will, and actual partnership. And in countries, we see that only if these three come together, like, for example, in Mexico or in Italy, that only then action on a regulative basis, on a regulatory basis, and on a policy basis will happen. So only if there is some kind of minister, some kind of state secretary, some kind of party that backs up the idea of the importance of GCD, SDG education, and climate education as such. And only when there is some kind of money, for example, for school products, like for books, for online classes, for whatever it might be that are the means to teach it. And only if there is partnership, some kind of community engagement, some kind of exchange between the ministries of education, the institutions of primary, secondary, tertiary education, only then something fruitful will come out. So these ingredients are definitely, they're necessary, and it takes champions. This is something that I have learned now in the past couple of years. People want to have identification figures with a movement. It's the Greta Thunbergs for the Friday for Future. It was the Black Lives Matter and the George Floyd attention that was suddenly given. So people like to have a human connection to an issue. And on the macro scale in a country, it will have to be someone who has a decisive role to play in regulatory systems. In a school level, it will have to be the one teacher, the one headmaster, the one headmistress, the one student who is taking this issue forward and is driving it.
Taking that a little bit further, do you have any additional advice for how to better communicate these communities of various stakeholders who are working towards this effort, but to have greater impact? How can you better coordinate, basically?
How can you better coordinate? No one likes to be subjected to coordination, I'm afraid. Like the moment you say, I'm going to be a coordinator of a platform, people are like, oh God, I don't want to be told what I need to do. But what is really helpful is that if you meet the other one on the basis of their ethos and of their, I would always say it's logos, ethos, and pathos. So to become a really good communicator, someone who is a great speaker tends to cover these three areas. And it's the same principle in microscale, macroscale. Let me explain. So if you are a great communicator, you will manage to appeal to your audience on the logos, which is the cognitive level, on the academic level. You will back up your arguments with information. You will not completely overflood the other one with numbers, but you will give the right numbers at the right time. And you will be convincing in your argument because it's evident that you have thought about it a lot. You will also be able to appeal to the ethos of the other one. Ethos is the Greek word for value, if you wish. So you can appeal to a value system that you have in common, that you both strive for eradicating violence against women, both or a multitude of people strive for including climate action education in your school, in your Scouts group, in your university class. And then the third and not to be underestimated element in this wonderful three-party trias of a good communicator is pathos, that you manage to instill a feeling in the other one with what you have to say, that you are passionate yourself enough that the other one will see, okay, there is emotion behind it. And I feel that this is authentic and genuine. So it's the logos, the ethos, and the pathos. When you mirror image that to the GCED principles, to the global citizenship education principles, it's very much that whenever you want to instill change, it has to happen on the cognitive level, on the socio-emotional level, and eventually also on the behavioral level, like on the level where you really do take action. So yeah, I know lots of principles sounds very academic, but it turns out in real life scenarios, it works the moment you are playing on that kind of instrument.
Thank you. I'm so glad this interview is recorded because I really think I need to go back and listen to everything you have said. There's just so much packed in that is really right on target with the kind of discussions that we were hoping to have. Do you have any other advice or last thoughts that you would like to share?
Just last thoughts, let me repeat. Every journey starts with the first step. Every journey should come from the heart. Ban Ki-moon paraphrases it saying, be passionate and compassionate and go out in the world as a global citizen. And he too says, and probably I can close with these words, we don't have a planet B, we have a planet A. And this is the planet we currently are living on. And we don't have a plan B, but we have a plan A. And this is, the SDGs are our plan A. And hence, we have another 10 years to fulfill the Agenda 2030. And every individual, every company, every government, every international organization needs to do its utmost to contribute to it, because it's literally our chance as humankind to learn from our mistakes and to do better in the future for generations to come.
Monika, thank you so much for the interview today. And for those of you listening, please check out more on the center, Ban KiMoon Center for Global Citizens. Please find them online for the work that they're doing. And please continue to stay connected with us on edsd.cfd.columbia.edu. You can send us questions. Please revisit this interview as well. Monika, thank you so much for your time and for your insights today.
Thank you.
Thank
All
you.
the best.
We'll be in touch. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.